This video is going to cover a leather notebook cover created by one of the students of the leather classes that we hold here at the shop. Welcome back to the Student Build notebook cover. We left off last time where he described the line, and now we're preparing to start the basket weave stamp. This particular stamp, if you'll notice, has a brass head on it and a stainless steel shaft. That's one of the Sergi stamps. It's beautifully made, makes it super easy to align the stamps when you're going from one impression to the next. So the student is actually working on both sides of the line. For ease of ensuring the stamps line up, I actually had him rotate it after each punch so that he was always working on the same side of the line. You'll notice as he goes through the process, he actually progresses rather nicely and is able to keep it oriented the same way and just go back and forth on either side of the line. But when you do a basket weave stamp, you want to align those little legs of the stamp, one right on top of the other, and it makes it so that it lines up nice and neat, and it actually produces that visual effect of a basket weave stamp. If you'll notice, as he is stamping and getting closer to the border, he's leaving a little bit of room there, and as we were going through this process, I didn't want him to have to learn how to lean the stamp and just make a partial impression. So we left quite a bit of a margin of error around the border, and as we come through with the border stamp, we'll be able to cover all of that gap up. Typically, anytime I use a basket weave stamp, I try to leave enough room where I can place a border around it. It just gives it a nice, crisp, clean look. During this part of the basket weaving process, you can see him moving the basket weave stamp around the border, trying to determine if he could get one more full stamp impression between the last good stamp and the border. And so we were going through and just making sure that we had every possible stamp impression that we could make. Now we're going to go ahead and start with the border stamp and go completely around this little triangle in the corner. This particular border stamp is just a regular craft tool from Tandy. It does a really good job of covering up any of the edges of the basket weave stamp. And as you'll notice, he started in one corner and he's working his way down. The direction I gave him was something that I learned from Don Gonzalez, watching some of his videos. But when he gets to this bend here, you'll notice he comes to the other corner and works his way back to the middle. This way, from a visual standpoint, if there is any kind of gap left when making the border stamp around there, it won't be so obvious to the eye. So he did it here on that long curvy line, and he'll also do it between the far edge of the shape to the corner. he'll do that on both sides. There was quite a bit of gap left in that bottom corner of the notebook where the Basket Weave stamp kind of stopped. So I gave him one big mammoth border stamp and told him to whack it really, really hard to kind of cover up that bottom edge. Again, that tool is also a craft tool. Now that we've got all the stamping done, we can remove the blue painter's tape. He started on the bottom edge, and you notice just part of the tape came off. I pointed out that if you start at the top corner and begin to pull the tape down, all of it will come off in one fell swoop. So he was able to remove all of that. And since we're dealing with Hermann oak leather, you can see that the fuzz on that back side of the leather is very, very minimal. That's the advantage of working with Hermann oak leather. Now we're ready to punch the stitching holes in the outside cover. Later we'll attach the flaps on the inside and glue it, and then punch through the cover again through the flaps. But these tools that we're using here are from Weaver Leather, and they are super, super nice punches. By the way, I'm not affiliated with any of the tool suppliers that we talk about in this video. That little chunk of beeswax, he's using that to rub onto the stitching irons, and by doing that it just allows it to release a little bit easier from the leather. There's also a shiny little piece of triangular shaped metal right behind his wrist now. You'll see him use that. That is a tool I purchased on Amazon, and it really helps separate the leather from the forks after you've punched through. Now this is really kind of the first time that he's used this tool, and so I tell him to make sure that it goes through that second piece of leather, which if you notice, I've got the block of marble, I've got a cutting board, just a regular old run-of-the-mill cutting board, and then I have a piece of leather on top of that, scrap leather. And the reason for all of that is you want a solid surface to be hitting on, but at the same time you do not want to run your forks directly into the marble. It will dull the points and make them really blunt. So even with a cutting board, it makes it difficult sometimes to remove the fork from your project if it goes down into the cutting board. So I like to just put a piece of leather underneath it. But one of the ways that I judge whether or not the fork's gone down far enough, oops, believe me, that was not the first time I've seen a fork like that drop off of the workbench. I've done it a number of times. You kind of see he's kind of grinning there in the top left-hand corner, laughing almost. But anyway, we would use the forks to punch down through, and you'll see you'll pull it up, make sure that it went through that second piece of leather, check the forks, make sure it got good depth through the project itself. But yeah, that little tool there that he just placed down is super, super easy. Now, this is the two-prong version of that same fork. It's got the same dimension between the forks. I believe this is a 5 or a 6 millimeter gap. I can't remember. But as you get to a corner of a project, you want to use less forks because it's easier to work around the corner. The method that I shared with him to use was to put after you've punched a series of holes, the last hole, you put the fork in to start this next series of holes. And after he gets around this corner, or maybe on the next side, I actually have, instead of a 4-prong, I've got a 5-prong or a 6-prong, and he's able to use it, and it makes it just go a little bit quicker. That wooden handle does not come stock on that model fork. That's something that I placed on there myself, and my intention was to move it from fork to fork depending on which one I was using, but the shaft of the forks are actually different sizes, and I never got around to making them for the others. But that 2-prong fork is just a lot smaller for my hands, so I just left that wooden dowel rod piece on the fork itself and just use it like that all the time, never taking it off. So that larger fork is a 6-prong, and I double checked the gap on that. It's a 5mm gap. I've got 4mm and 3mm. The 5 I like because it has got a little bit better spacing. I think the stitching lays down nice, and I get to punch less holes that way. So that's another advantage to using the 5mm. As he's wrapping up the hole punching for the stitching, we'll actually do a saddle stitch by hand. But as we finish up here, we'll pick up with the next video where we will actually antique the cover. We will apply the antique gel. We will also include the flaps that are going to go on the inside. We'll do all of that dyeing in the next video. So please stick around and watch part 3 with us. It'll be coming out shortly. I also wanted to give another shout out. The student we're filming, actually his younger brother did most of the video recording as well as all of the video editing. So I can't give out names because they're minors, but they did a great job on the video. For those of you who know, you know.